5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and it looks like Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is a hit. But that still leaves the question, what about its prequel graphic novel, Godzilla Kong: The Hunted? Yeah, this thing released literally a couple of days before the movie came out, and I did technically get a chance to read it before seeing the movie, but I've withheld on speaking about it until afterward, so that I can confirm something that has been pretty much public knowledge from the beginning. See, I've been collecting all of the monsterverse prequel graphic novels pretty much from the beginning. And while they are interesting expansions of the world, the fact remains that they're also unnecessary. That actually sounds a little bit harsher than I meant it. Basically, you don't need to read any of these in order to understand the movie. There's always been that concern that such a thing might be possible, pretty much from the beginning. But ultimately, these are just for the hardcore fans to get a little bit more monsterverse in their lives. You don't actually have to read them in order to understand what's going on. Just like you actually didn't need to watch Monarch: Legacy of Monsters in order to understand the New Empire. Yeah, you remember how people were speculating that Kurt Russell's character, who flew off of the ship as they were leaving Axis Mundi, was somehow going to turn up in the New Empire as a surprise cameo? Didn't turn out to happen. In fact, despite claims that Monarch was somehow going to be setting up important things for the New Empire, nothing from that show carries over, basically. Not even the concept of Axis Mundi. Maybe you can say it reaffirms the wormhole stuff, but that was technically introduced in Godzilla vs. Kong. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all a tangent. We're here to talk about the prequel for The New Empire, which is entitled Godzilla Kong: The Hunted, and ask ourselves, even if we know we don't have to read this in order to understand the movie, is it still worth reading? Well, first it's worth noting that there are a lot of returning names for this particular one, including mostly in the artists. There are like 4 different artists who worked on this. And the writer is the same guy who's been writing Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong, which I've been following issue by issue. You can check that out if you're interested. And I will say that in previous issues, the artists have certainly proven themselves to be fairly good at depicting the different Monsterverse elements, even if on occasion there are certain things where you look at a piece and realize, wait a minute, did they just trace over a still from the movie for that? Or it looks way too close. But overall, there's more original art to each of them. And as far as Brian Buccellato goes with the Justice League crossover, he's basically delivered exactly what that crossover promised, which is the world's most iconic superheroes and the world's most iconic giant monsters in a knockdown, drag-out brawl. The plot does drag a bit in the middle, and you could argue that certain story elements could have been perhaps either streamlined or handled a bit differently, but overall, the book made a promise and delivered, so you can't very well fault it for that. It's not finished as of this posting, so there's still a chance that the final issue, which releases a few weeks later, will completely bungle the ending, but I'm not necessarily thinking that's gonna happen. It could, but I'm hoping it doesn't. So, we know that this book has some good credentials behind it. How does it function as its own thing, though? Well, the story is kinda twofold. The primary plot is about a character named Raymond Martin, who has not appeared in the movies or the shows or anything else before, and he's basically built this giant diesel punk samurai mecha to go down into the Hollow Earth and hunt monsters, whether they're the flora fauna that we first met on Skull Island, or larger creatures, possibly even working up to Kong himself. And in order to get away with this, first of all, he's using a portal that Monarch apparently doesn't have access to, or he's paid someone off or something. And he's also been setting off beacons all over the world in order to keep Godzilla distracted, just on the off chance Godzilla goes after him. But those beacons have also attracted Scylla, who's now going on a world tour of her own, and Godzilla's always showing up just a little too late to stop her from causing damage. Meanwhile, Martin is going down into the Hollow Earth and hunting, and his inevitable clash with Kong, who is also down there, it just keeps building until the very end. Overall, not a bad concept for a prequel. It finds a way to incorporate both Godzilla and Kong into the story without having them clash, and also giving them both something to do. Although, I did notice that, unlike the movie, Godzilla is in this slightly more than Kong is. Not that Kong is completely absent, but because of the nature of that side of the plot, we see Godzilla popping up more, whereas Kong's just kind of chilling for the most part down in the Hollow Earth, and aside from the beginning and the end, he doesn't do too much throughout the middle of it. And basically that's the gist of the plot. Very straightforward in that regard. You have Bernie providing some commentary for Godzilla and Scylla's movements through his Titan Truth podcast, and that is basically the role he's serving. It kind of feels almost like a throwback to GMK when you have the helicopter news crew doing that wrestling-style commentary on Godzilla's fight with Baragon. But, you know, he's actually at a safe distance, so he's not going to get caught in the blast or anything. And that means Bernie is at his most subdued in this book. Not a bad place for him to be, certainly. But you can still, the way it's written, hear his voice. You can still hear Brian Tyree Henry delivering these lines if you really put your imagination to it. And, well, there is a bit more to say about the plot, but I'll get to that in a moment. Now, like I said, there are 4 different artists that worked on this thing. Although, I think their art blends well enough that just going through the different pages, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell who did what. So, that's a good sign, certainly, when the artists are able to meld their styles in such a way that it all feels consistent. It doesn't feel like every other page you're looking at something completely new. That being said, there are a couple of places where the art kind of falls through, that kind of doesn't work. Like, in particular, there's one page where, here, you can just see for yourselves, look at Godzilla's frowny face expression. To me, that looks like the only way that face could work is if his muzzle was suddenly contracted really extremely to make him look like a pug, basically. It's a weird anomaly in the art style. And then just a couple pages later, we see these two guys whose faces don't look like they conform to any sort of real human anatomy. And that stands out when you look at the other human characters who actually do look not necessarily photoreal, but they look like real people, especially the ones who are based on actual actors. So those sort of anomalies are not that common in the book, but when they happen, they stand out because they're infrequent. You also occasionally have stuff like a shot where Godzilla's spines don't quite look right. Like I said, they are infrequent, but because they're infrequent in a book where the art is mostly consistent, it does stand out a lot more. Of course, we also have some new elements introduced, like the new giant robot, which doesn't necessarily have the flashiest design, not by any stretch of the imagination, but you can see stuff like that asymmetrical crescent moon in the head portion that's, like I said, reminiscent of a samurai helmet. And overall, it's not bad. I mean, it doesn't have the same iconic level of design that the Jaegers from Pacific Rim had, but it looks cool enough. And then, of course, we have new creatures known as spine prowlers in the Hollow Earth, which are basically giant cheetahs, lions, whatever kind of big cat you want to refer to them for comparison, they're like that, but much, much larger. And while, again, not necessarily the flashiest creature designs out there, I mean, they look pretty normal when compared to the fact that Scylla's in the book, and Scylla's basically an ammonite with crab legs. I mean, they still look pretty interesting. There's a little section in the back where they show off the different concepts for what they could have looked like, and most of the changes they make would have been in the head regions. I feel like maybe they could have gone with a slightly more interesting head. The Triceratops shield one, I think, is my personal favorite of the alternatives. Overall, though, they don't look bad. They look like they could fit into the environment of the Hollow Earth. Does that mean they're going to show up in the movies at some point? Well, Tiamat did appear in the New Empire, so it's not impossible for a monster from the comics to leap onto the big screen. But ultimately, who knows? We don't see any of the other Hollow Earth creatures at this point. We do see a couple of callbacks to both the Skull Island movie and the Skull Island prequel comics, but that's about it. Okay, now we've got to get back to the plot, because there's an element towards the end that just stands out to me in kind of a bad way. Like, okay, there's one other part of this comic I should mention first where it doesn't technically have an ending, because as we're having Godzilla and Scylla going all over the world, it eventually does get to the point where they are both in Rome and they're going to have their battle, but then it says, in order to see how the battle turns out, watch the movie. So ultimately, I would say that is the Hunted's biggest contribution to the story. It tells us why Godzilla is fighting Scylla in Rome. Was it completely necessary? Again, I don't necessarily think it is, because it's not like we really need to know why Godzilla is fighting another monster. The movie provides all the explanation we need. Other monsters tend to attack human cities. Godzilla is the one who maintains balance, so he goes to stop them. And yeah, I mean, it does expand on the concept, like I said. Was it completely 100% necessary? If you didn't read this book and you didn't know it, then you're not missing that much. But what about the other plot involving the character of Raymond Martin? Well, first of all, let's acknowledge the name, Raymond Martin. Clear shout out to Raymond Burr, who played Steve Martin in the first Americanization of Gojira, Godzilla King of the Monsters, the original version. So, I mean, aside from that shout out, this character has nothing to do with him at all. He's an otherwise completely original character who could have been named anything. But they went with a little bit of an Easter egg anyway. But he's also supposed to be the antagonist. He's using his giant robot to venture into the Hollow Earth and kill monsters. Anything that constitutes a monster, he uses his robot to kill. And we're meant to see him as wrong for this, certainly, but there's a moment towards the end that, well, you know how people have been saying that Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is a dumb movie, even though there are quite a few people who don't elaborate as to how it's dumb? Well, you'll want to know what dumb looks like in this kind of a thing. Allow me to read you this little excerpt. Where is it? Here we go. I will put this on the screen for you to actually see, and you can read along if you want. But here's the exchange between these two guys who are loading up one of the scarbuffaloes for transport to be stuffed up top. "This is ridiculous. You call this hunting? I don't know what you call it. Where's the sport? Sneaking up and blasting them. They're not even predators. It's like fishing with a bazooka. Yeah, it's disgusting. It's not worth it." Yeah, I'm surprised I have to say this, but sneaking up on a target to blast it and targeting a herbivore, That is a legitimate form of hunting. That's pretty much recognized the world over as how hunting usually works. If you don't believe me, go and ask a real hunter if his preferred method of hunting is to just strut out into the open and loudly challenge only the deadliest predators in hand-to-hand combat, Tarzan style, and see what he says after he finishes laughing and realizes it's a serious question. This is kind of a stupid argument as to why Martin is wrong. The thing is, though, we know why Martin is wrong. I don't want to make it come across like this book doesn't know what it's saying, because it does. First of all, to answer the question that kicks off that little exchange, no, it's technically not hunting. What Martin is doing qualifies as poaching, which is illegal. So there's half of the argument for the shaky morality of his actions right there. It has to be illegal because he's doing this without anyone knowing and just killing creatures that you gotta think would otherwise be protected under some kind of environmentalist law. So, yeah, therein lies the first primary reason why what Martin is doing is ethically wrong. But then there's the other reason. We learn that Martin's motivation has to do with the events of 2014. He and everybody he cares about was in San Francisco when the Mutos attacked, and only he survived the ensuing battle, because none of them had time to evacuate. And it's implied that it was the female Mutos specifically that destroyed the building he was in. So he clearly is someone who wants revenge, but he can't get revenge on the Mutos themselves because Godzilla already disposed of them. So now he's going out and just killing all monsters indiscriminately. His desire for revenge just turned into a general hatred for all monsters on the planet. In other words, allegorically speaking, he's a racist committing hate crimes. So there's the other half of the moral argument. He is poaching, which is illegal, and he is attacking an entire subclass of creatures for the crimes of one creature that was already dealt with. So therein lies the argument, and the book knows that. I want to make it clear, the book does know this. It presents those things. Towards the end, he even has this speech to Kong, of all characters, about how humanity is superior to Titans, before he gets killed, of course. And right before that, he kills a mother spine prowler and is ready to kill her cubs as well, which in modern hunting, those are considered big no-nos. So he's clearly got no scruples when it comes to this sort of thing. But why did we have to include that other argument? The argument that in the long term just makes it look like those two other characters have no clue what they're talking about. It's a non sequitur. It wasn't really necessary. But that's the only really bad part of writing I can think of that stands out in this comic. Again, it isn't necessarily the most amazing Godzilla or Kong comic ever written, and you don't have to read it to understand the movie, but it serves its purpose well enough. There are some flaws that need fixing, of course, but, you know, it's not that bad. And those are my thoughts at the moment. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.